Hi, everyone. Welcome to Josh Wright Piano TV. We are so excited to have Graham Fitch back by popular demand for part two. Everyone loved part one. And as you may remember, we only got through a few concepts last time, and everyone was begging me, saying, "Oh, we want to hear more of what he has to say." So he's graciously agreed to come back on. Thank you, Graham. If you want an introduction about his background, who he studied with, and all of the previous concepts that we discussed, I will link that in the description below, part one. But we will commence with part two and just jump in with whatever concept you want to discuss first, Graham.
Hi, Josh. Nice to be back. I really enjoyed the last one. I think it was more of a little chat, wasn't it, between the two of us, and we covered a few points. Yeah, I suppose the first thing I wanted to talk about, it just seems to be front of mind because I'm writing a series on this for the online academy. I call these Q spots, which is quarantine spots. And what that means is, often when we come to a place in our piece, we might have three or four areas in a piece that don't always withstand the pressures of a run through or a performance, and they break down there. I'm sure you've heard it plenty of times. A student will come and play and they'll say, "Oh, I always go wrong there." And then I'll ask them, "Well, what steps have you taken to not to go wrong there? What do you do?" And a lot of the time it's just designating those areas. It might be three or four areas in one movement that trip us up. It could just be one spot that trips us up. So instead of starting from the beginning, which a lot of people seem to like to do, it's very good at the beginning, and we just go straight to those spots. But it's not just a question of playing them through; it's a question of finding a kind of step ladder approach to building the passage from the ground up, as it were. And I've got a little snippet from the first movement of the Pathétique because we talked about the Pathétique last time. So I thought, well, let's dig around the Q spot library. This spot, sure.
Okay, yeah.
Who's played it will. I've seen students freeze up there. I'm sure you have too. I mean, I'm sure any piano teacher has experienced that. When students get there, they freeze up. So rather than think about it just by playing it over and over in the hope that it'll somehow improve, I've got a sort of a step ladder approach. Maybe I could just run through it quickly with you.
Yeah,
Would that be good
that
fun?
would be great.
Well, I've noticed I've got a little aid memoir up here. I have noticed, blocking is a really useful thing to do first, isn't it? I don't know if you use this idea to block out the positions. That's pretty obvious. I think anybody who knows anything about piano practice would not find that revolutionary at all. But it's a very useful thing to do, and I find often very useful to label the harmonies because people tend not to use their brains enough, I don't think. There's a perfect cadence in F minor, B flat major, B flat minor, chromatic alteration, 2, 5, 1. So just a little labeling of the harmony is good. And then after that, the blocks, I call these blocks and taps, which is where we block the chord out and then tap a selected element. So I'm going to take the lowest note. And I'm sort of charting the progress of the fifth finger notes. I find that very useful because it puts my attention on the outer notes. I would do the same thing for the middle notes too. Just be aware, there's a whole bunch of C's there. Now a whole bunch of F's with my second finger. Change. And then to do the same thing with the thumb, rather lighter. Because I want to encourage lightness in my thumb, and so on. And then why stop there? Why not take two notes, tap two notes, hold on to the middle note, tap the outer notes. You notice I'm not lifting my fingers up. I'm not talking about that old-fashioned lifting fingers. I don't want that. But just releasing the keys to the surface. And then I find little patterns like this. I'm sure Beethoven wouldn't object to a little waltz, And then how about starting that from the middle note? Yeah, I find that very helpful. It draws my attention to what's going on in the middles of the chords, effectively three-note chords, isn't it? From there, I might just even take the outside notes by themselves, to find the line. And as I do that, notice patterns. Well, I notice the left hand is diatonic. If I play until there, whereas the right hand has half steps and then whole steps, half steps, whole steps. So I'm trying to just engage my analytical brain, in other words, my thinking mind, along with my wiggling fingers, if you will, so that it's not just a technical thing. My mind is engaged in it, my ear is engaged in it. And then I think after that, again, this is not rocket science to anybody that knows anything about piano practice, but some rhythmical work is very useful. I think probably that is an obvious one to do, but rather a less obvious one would be, and I really love doing this, take half a measure slowly and the other half measure up to the tempo. So, and then of course the other way around, and then do whole measures in that format. So we're mixing up elements of slow practice with fast practice, but in a very controlled way. And if you begin your practice session on that sonata movement with those stages, you can have them written down, and then maybe not even immediately play it through, then go back to the beginning. And I have found in my experience that sort of approach just helps to nail a problem. It's not always a technical problem. Of course, this relies on rotation. You wouldn't be able to do that without rotating, or rather, you could, but it would be cumbersome, mechanically cumbersome. So I call these cue spots or quarantine spots, and I'll often ask a student, show me what you've done with that cue spot. I'm really curious to hear what you've been doing with that cue spot this week. So then they will know that in the lesson they're going to have to go through those processes.
Brilliant. Yeah. Everybody who just watched that, have you actually done, he probably took us through 8 to 12 different ways of doing that. I don't know if you have them numbered, but if you have actually done that work consistently, even usually for a week,
yes,
you will notice huge differences. And the thing that I want to stress here, as Graham was talking, something that came to my mind was the fact that you don't know what's going to unlock the passage for you in your mind. You might get 1 or 2 methods in and then magically be able to play it, or you might have to get all the way to that last one and you might have to keep reviewing those, but you never know the time period of unlocking something. And that's happened to me so many times. I'll just keep working through as many creative things, and then I'll think of something, or I'll think of organizing it a different way in my mind, or I'll think of a different fingering as I'm doing those types of things. Sometimes even a fingering revelation will come and say, oh, I actually, when I do that rhythm, this feels uncomfortable. In an even tempo, that feels okay, but I can see now that this is going to unlock it. And so brilliant. I loved all of the variations there. And one other thing that I found fascinating is my teachers would often say, oh, a student came to me and they invented this new practice method. Isn't this brilliant? And so I would just encourage everybody watching this, invent your own sequencing as well. So start with everything Graham just said, and all the tips that he's given us graciously in these videos, but also continue to create your own practice methods according to the passage.
Absolutely, and I love the what you use the word creatively, because a lot of practice people sort of don't really engage in playfulness, or we play music, we play the piano, just a spirit of playfulness, a spirit of creativity, and going through all these stages just keeps your mind engaged in what we do, so that it's never mindless. And I often find people's practicing mindless. They're not really, they're just sort of thinking, well, if I repeat it over and over and over, it's bound to get better. But, only perfect practice makes perfect, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So it's not a question of being perfect. It's a question of just finding as many different paths through through the passage. I think absolutely you're right. It could be the third thing that you do in this sequence that unlocks it, as you say. But I also believe in coming back to it, going through, because really what we're doing here is craftsmanship. This is something I was taught from the beginning about being a craftsman at the keyboard, because it's all to do with craft, isn't it? Practice is all to do with craft. Just the discipline of going through this stage, then this stage, then this stage, then this stage, and doing it, repeating the process daily for a few days, a week even. And then if you're going to a teacher and you know your teacher might ask you to demonstrate some of those, show me how you've been doing the blocks and the taps, then you know that it's going to be witnessed in the lesson. I think that's important too. Yeah.
Absolutely. I always tell students natural talent definitely helps. And I know you've seen that. I mean, there's some students who just kind of have a natural ability to the keyboard and others who struggle, but it's the persistence, the hard work ethic that will actually yield the results. Of course, if you combine natural talent with hard work and no natural talent with hard work, well, the natural talent will kind of help. But I'm convinced that anyone who desires it and is persistent enough can achieve a very good level of piano playing. Probably
Absolutely.
not a professional level for everybody, but a very healthy level. So I completely agree with what you're saying there.
That's great. Yeah, wonderful. Where do we go next?
Okay, so two things that I constantly get asked about. I would say these are the two hottest topics on my entire channel, which is crazy that it can boil down to these two because there's just so many things that we've gone over. But maybe if I could get your thoughts on performance anxiety or stage fright or nerves, whatever you want to call it, and also reducing tension. And those might even have some overlap between them. So maybe we could talk about the mental tension and the physical tension. If you have any general tips with how you advise students to get ready for a performance mentally, and then if there's any physical unlocks with common problems. I don't care if you go through octaves or scalar passages or parallel intervals. Like I know last time we talked a bit about
yes.
the nocturne, and I actually applied your methods. It worked great, so thank you.
Yes.
But anything you'd like to discuss about that that can shed further light on that, I'm sure everyone would be very grateful.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think the first thing is not to separate mental tension and physical tension, because they're both, whatever goes on in the mind is going to come out in the body, isn't it? So if we're anxious, it's going to show up somewhere in the body. Right, that's a big subject, of course. It's all in the preparation, isn't it? A lot of it is in the preparation. So if we're 1,000% prepared, all of the ideas that I was showing there in the Beethoven are probably overkill from the point of view of preparation. So if we're thoroughly prepared, then we can trust our body. But the mind plays tricks, as we all know. We might be going along swimmingly in a performance, and then suddenly you've got this doubt. I've had this doubt before. What's that next bass note? I know my left hand's got to move down there. What on earth am I going down to? I don't know. And then I can remember I tell you this, I can remember one time playing a piece I knew very well, and in a competition, and it was the final stages of the competition, and I was starting a piece that I knew literally backwards, and there was one interval that I knew I had to negotiate, and it was a melodic interval, not difficult, but I suddenly doubted myself. And I could feel this panic in the moment. And the only way I could deal with it was to look down at the floor and I think I remember trying to conjure up an image of an elephant or something like that, a flying elephant, call it Dumbo, to just distract me so that I could let my muscle memory or my fingers just do what they had to do. And it was a little temporary glitch, and it was fine. And actually nothing happened. In that I played the note perfectly, and I went, phew, made it. But I also remember a lesson as a student, as an undergrad student. My professor had said, okay, in 2 weeks' time, I'd like to hear L'Île Joyeuse, Debussy. And I practiced it very dutifully and learned it very well, memorized it. And, 2 weeks when you're young is probably, okay. Wouldn't want to do that now, but in those days, I did that sort of thing. And I was so determined to show my teacher how well I had prepared it and how well, I could do it. But I went in, and of course, it fell apart rather in the sense that I was very, very tight and very tense physically, because, and the tension didn't come from my body, it didn't start in my body, it started out with that thought in my head, I better make sure I get this right. And my teacher, being a very wise man, said to me, okay, Graham, I'd like you to play it again. And this time, can you make as many mistakes as you possibly can? Try and play more wrong notes than right notes. And so he gave me permission to mess up. With that permission, I was able to immediately change my mindset. And of course, what came out, I wouldn't say it was perfect, but what came out was what I wanted to come out. Because I'd had permission from him to be spontaneous and go with the flow and not be too controlling. I think the thing with performance is you've got to actually, when you get out there, you've got to leave the careful practicer in the green room. You know, there's two states. There's the practicing state, which is all about thinking and evaluating and listening and judging and analyzing. And then there's the performance state, which is much more of a flow, you know, getting into the flow, getting into the character of the music and not worrying about what position your elbow is in bar 6 or what the pedal's doing. And it's tricky to get from the one to the other. I've often found that's tricky. But just on the stage, when you're in the moment, I find breathing, people forget to breathe, you know, so if you can somehow just remember to breathe. I was shown a wonderful thing by Anne Shine, who I studied with for a year. She told us to clench our butt muscles, you know, just literally that. I won't do too vivid a demonstration of that, but the idea is if you do that, I notice all the tension just disappears from my shoulders. So if I've got tension, this is what she used to do, probably maybe even still does. Just that little practical tip. But I find if I'm starting, if I'm starting, I bet everybody now at home is sitting there doing that thing.
Yeah.
But but the breathing thing, I think you can actually build in when you practice. You can practice breathing. Practice maybe breathing in for a half a measure and breathing out for the second half a measure. So you kind of tie in the breath with the phrasing even. Other things I think are really helpful are visualization. I don't know if you do this, but it's where you put yourself in a calm place, get in touch with the body, literally feel the body, sometimes lying down and just imagining yourself in the green room of the venue, if you know it, or imagining yourself waking up on the day of a performance feeling absolutely calm, saying things to yourself like, I've done everything that's humanly possible to prepare for this performance. I deserve to enjoy it. I know if I'm enjoying it, my audience is going to enjoy it. And I fully deserve to enjoy it because I've put in the work. And then that sort of self-talk, I think, is very, very powerful. So the visualization would be just imagining yourself carrying those positive thoughts with you through the day, you know, up to half an hour before you leave your house to get to the venue. If you know the green room, what does it smell like? Can you smell can you imagine the guy who's coming into you and saying 15 minutes, and rather than thinking 15 minutes, oh yikes, 15 minutes, oh how wonderful, I'm going to be able to share this gift with the audience, to share this music with the audience. And yes, I might go wrong because I'm human and humans go wrong, but it doesn't matter, everybody goes wrong. I mean, we've all heard some of the greatest pianists in the world go wrong. So what?
Yeah. I just want to follow up on a couple of things, just to reiterate what you've said. I actually wrote a blog post. I think it was a really stupid title. It was something like, I think it was Pencils, Tigers, and Other Stuff. Basically, talking about that same exact thing. If you are in a panicked moment in your performance, think of a random object, like you said. One time I remember I was very prepared with the Serious Variations by Mendelssohn. But there's a lot of time to overthink things, especially in the main theme and those first. I don't even remember how it goes at this point, but I just thought of my wife's face for that, or sometimes I'll think of a pencil or something just to get me through, and then once you feel comfortable, just and then I think another point that everyone needs to remember is to not overly judge yourself. So I played a concert just on the 6th this month, and I was very nervous because I was playing some new repertoire. I just played that. And I did it because people had wanted a tutorial of that on my channel, the third movement of the Moonlight Sonata. And so I definitely underprepared with my old, war horse pieces like the Andante Spianato and Grand Polonaise. So I got to this, and I played G, F sharp, G rather than so.
We've all done that.
And I just thought, okay, we're just still in G major. We're hanging out here. So, kind of going back even to what you were saying about Pathétique, the fact that I knew my harmonies, the mistakes couldn't get that serious.
Yeah.
I mean, because I knew I was in G major. So the fact that I played G, F sharp, G rather than E, F sharp, E, it didn't phase the audience much. And a lot of times, another thing is we tend to make a much bigger deal out of things when we're on stage. I remember playing Choral Fantasy by Beethoven a couple of years ago, and I had kind of slacked off on preparing it because a month and a half before I was playing Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto, and I was so overwhelmed by that piece. It's such a huge piece that I thought, you know what? The Choral Fantasy is 20 pages. I've got a month and a half. I'll work on it once I'm done with this. And it was fine. I was very prepared. I worked really hard in that month and a half. And I remember how those first little octaves go, and the left hand's doing these strange little triplet figures that had never tripped me up. And I remember I had about a half a second pause, maybe even 1 second. Everybody can go see it on YouTube and laugh at me in the comments. It's totally fine with me. But it was, I walked off the stage, and my wife came backstage, and I was like, I'm ready to quit the piano. That was terrible. And she's like, are you kidding me? She's like, you had that one mistake. I was like, that was so obvious. That was my solo at the beginning of the piece. And she's like, it was very minimal. And then I listened back to it the next day, and I was like, yes, it's an obvious mistake, but okay, that was overall pretty good performance. So not judging yourself too much. Sorry, you gave us so much valuable info. One other thing that I wanted to say, you had talked about clenching those muscles and breathing. One thing that I've noticed that, I mean, Glenn Gould does this. I've noticed it in Sergei Babayan a lot. You'll just watch him playing, and you'll just see his mouth open like every 5 or 6 seconds because he's actually humming. If you get close enough, you can barely hear him humming. But that's a physical thing that students can do to help. And then the last thing that you had brought up, which I loved about the L'Île Joyeuse, is okay, you have permission to make mistakes. Start loosening up. And an exercise that I used when I was preparing Rock 3 in that Ossia Cadenza, just to get those, and then as you get more comfortable with that, you can start to get a little bit more accurate while still preparing that. I think a lot of students think, okay, I've got to get my piece perfect, and then I'll focus on relaxation. It is built from day one. If you can ingrain relaxation from day one with the movements you're doing, we talked a lot in the last video about rotation, then as a student, you will ingrain those relaxation techniques to the point that they just live with you. And when you do tend to tighten up during a performance, oh, I have something to fall back on, rather than, oh, that was the last step that I learned is how to relax. So
yeah.
Thanks for sparking all those thoughts in my mind. Please continue with whatever else you wanted to say.
Well, what I like it about when we chat is that you say something, I say something, and we sort of bat it back and forth. And I mean, I do something for performance preparation, which is where I'll deliberately stop. So I'll interrupt myself deliberately and stop, and then imagine the next phrase of the music. So I might play one phrase, take my hands off, imagine the next phrase, and then join in again with the third phrase, stop. It could even be just as simple as a measure or two measures, a block of a unit of music, either measured out or freer. And then during those spots where I take my hand off the keyboard, the music is still going on in my head. Then I rejoin the music from cold. what that seems to do, it seems to do very well, is it's like buying insurance. You hope you don't need it in a performance, but if you should, something goes wrong, you know that you can actually join in the music again from cold. So if I'm doing this really systematically, it'll be one measure play, one measure imagine, one measure play, one measure imagine.
Wow.
Yeah, it's difficult, it's challenging, but then playing the piano is challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
and if you want to be really secure with the memory, it's well worth trying. What else from what you said? Just the idea of being physically free always. I think there's never a situation in piano playing where we want to be physically not free. There's a kind of muscular. I'm thinking beginning of the Tchaikovsky concerto, for example. Those chords, the hand is going to be strong, but the arm is not going to be in any way tight. It's got to be free and released, and gestures that come up and out, and roundedness here, things that are not fixed in the hand. I studied for a little bit with Peter Feuchtwanger. I don't know if that's a name that means anything to you. He was a piano guru, really, and he had his own set of exercises that put the playing into neutral, a kind of zero. He started his first exercise. It might be interesting to people to see. The first exercise was simply this, where you put the 4 fingers flat on white keys, literally flat, knuckles collapsed, thumb hanging off the edge, and you start off with the other hand playing the G or whatever note you're on. Don't know if you can see my hand. Yeah. Then you tap the nail, and then you let the finger play the key. Then you go backwards the other way. So it's nail, and then the finger itself. Now what that does, you may think, what on earth is the point of this? What it does is it puts you very much in tune with what's going on up here. When the left hand's touching the note, or the key, this is passive, this finger's passive. So there's nothing going on in the arm. Then the next one, also passive, but you've got a little bit more contact with the finger here from the other hand. Then when the finger has to play by itself, okay, I wasn't aware that I was using a little excess up there. Now, there's several exercises that we go through in the Feuchtwanger regime, which basically put the playing into neutral. I've just done a series on this on the online academy as well for people that are interested. But what that does is it puts the playing into neutral, so that when you go back to muscular piano playing, proper, honest to goodness, projected sound and positions, you're just aware of how much less you need to do than you thought you had to do. So, we can so often overkill and overdo things. That's why I like playing on the surface of the keys. I don't know if you ever do that sort of thing. Just play on the top of it. You were talking about the Mendelssohn there. This is also fantastic for memory. This is the Variations Sérieuses with no sound. But I'm touching every single note. And I'm, of course, not using any kind of grounded down into the key energy at all. I'm just thinking across. But I find that fantastic, not only for memory, but also for just freedom, the anti-tension. I don't want to use the word relax, because we can't really be relaxed when we play, but we're free of tension is probably a better way of describing it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that brings to mind, I remember, so if you, we'll just grab one here. So if you, place, it's just an iPad pencil here. If we push this key down, and the key has strength in lifting that up. And I think my finger probably weighs less than this pencil, maybe the same weight. And so for me, I focus on this concept when I'm working on this, rather than pushing down into that. Or this passage, I remember I struggled with this for many years because I was muscling through it and pressing, and a teacher said, Josh, stop pressing the keys. Let the keys themselves lift your fingers. It just gives you so much more clarity. So I love that. I was gonna say one other thing. I can't remember. Let's just keep going. There was one other thing that sparked in my mind, but I can't remember what I was gonna say.
Well, maybe it'll come back. But just going back to something that's come back to me just now about what you said earlier about you imagined a pencil or you imagined your wife's face. I once dedicated a performance to a colleague who died prematurely, very suddenly, and it was a terrible thing when nobody expected her to go. So I just stood up and said, I dedicate this performance to this. Everybody knew who she was. So it took my mind off myself. It wasn't about me. It was about the music, and it was about this person who I was trying to commemorate with the performance. I sometimes imagine something maybe like a Buddha sitting on the piano desk, and if I'm starting to get anxious, I do this at the dentist too because I can't stand the dentist. So I've got these various icons. I think it's an icon, isn't it? So you're thinking about something else because you don't really need to think. You shouldn't be thinking too much about what note comes next. That should be automated. I think it's the interference, isn't it? It's the psychological interference, that part of us that says you don't really know this piece or you've forgotten what comes next. So it's a question of shutting that up and just letting all the work that we've done in the practice come out, free flow.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remembered what I was going to say. It goes back to that finger touching, but just following up on that comment there, I think YouTube is an especially dangerous place. I think this becomes ingrained into us. What you just said, the selflessness of a performance. Generally, unless maybe you're in a competition and your fellow competitors are sitting in the audience, usually the audience is wanting you to play your best. No one's hoping that you fail, except maybe those competitors. And
Yes.
I think that if we can, the reason I say YouTube's such a dangerous place is while you are listening to a gorgeous recording, often I find myself scrolling down, like, let's see what people are saying in the comments. Who cares what people are saying in the comments? Is this taking away from my experience? And as the performer, you have to learn to let that go and dedicating a performance to someone who you love. Or one of my teachers said, I always look to the far right front row person and I give them, just mentally, all of my emotional baggage as I walk onto stage, and then I go and they're holding all my baggage while I
Uh,
perform, and then I take that off when I mean, of course, it's all imaginative, but it's so important to let go when we're performing. One quick thing, I had never thought of playing on the tops of the keys for a memorization purpose. That's brilliant. I will definitely start incorporating that. I have used that exercise before. I remember I was in a lesson and I was playing the and this part a little muscly there, and my teacher said just touch the keys. Okay, now
yeah.
add 2 decibels of sound if you can
Yes.
imagine that,
Yes.
and then just a little bit more, and that was the unlock for playing lighter than I ever had been able to play that passage in my entire life. Such an easy exercise, but something very significant. So
I use that a lot in my teaching because people are usually trying too hard. It's like at the end of a performance, what are you going to remember? You're going to remember the bits that went well, maybe, but the chances are you're going to remember the parts that you're not happy with. So it's so easy to focus on the negative, isn't it? So, exactly, I use that all the time. I talk about it rather than decibels. I talk about it percentage. So add 10% of the notes. Now they'll come wherever. Some notes won't sound, other notes will. It doesn't matter. 10%, 20%. Usually get up to 70%, and they're already at 100%.
yeah,
Because we try too hard, don't we?
absolutely.
I think all of us do.
I completely agree. And when we can learn to let that go, and it's actually a more enjoyable experience. It's very strange, and I'm sure you've felt this phenomenon all the time. So I was using it. I haven't practiced this for about a week, so hopefully this goes okay. But and then I'm just gonna skip ahead here. Those left-hand jumps, the more that um, the more that you can be floppy with the wrist, it's very strange. You actually start playing more. At least I do. I start playing more accurately, and when I try to control things, it actually makes it worse. So it's kind
Yes.
of this letting go feeling, not only mentally, but also physically, that you trust, hey, I've done all the exercises that we started this interview with. I've gone through all the trouble places, but can I go through and now trust it and just kind of flop into those places? And actually, when your hand is loose and you're kind of flopping into it, you can travel to the keys faster. And
Yes.
obviously, you know all this. I'm mostly saying this for the audience watching this video, but it's kind of a cool phenomenon that happens when you are playing your very best. You often find it's when you're just letting go and it's completely loose. And it's like, how is this happening? But it works out brilliantly.
Absolutely. I don't know if this show has come across. It's called a show called Keeping Up Appearances. It's a comedy show starring Patricia Routledge as Hyacinth Bouquet, this fearsome dragon whose next door neighbor comes in for coffee, and she's so scared of this Hyacinth figure because Hyacinth will insist on giving her not the best china because she's frightened that her friend is going to break the china. So now this woman, this next door neighbor, is perfectly capable of holding onto a cup of tea without breaking the china until she's in the presence of somebody who's worried about her dropping it and breaking it. And of course, what happens? The comedy is she comes in and the cup wobbles, and then the next thing you know, the teacup's flown out of her hand and is broken on the floor. Because of the interference from the other person, and the other person can cause serious self-doubt, can't they? In that, this is why teachers often do more harm than good, because they dwell on the negatives and they don't encourage what's working, and they just get in the way a lot of the time, getting in the way of the progress of the student or the ability of the student to do what comes naturally. I've seen this all the time. But yeah, so provided we've gone through all those stages in our practice and we know how to move, I think it's just a question of letting go of it and just allowing it to happen. But it's not always easy because we want to control. I think we all want to control what we're doing, especially adults.
Oh yeah, I think it gets worse the older you get. I
Yeah,
remember
for sure.
not knowing very much about my theory at all, and really not having a whole lot of rescue points, or memory points, and just getting up. I think I was 9, and I was probably playing it at this tempo, and it went perfectly. And then like when you get 15, 16, 20s, and now 30s, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got to prepare so much more because I'm a control freak. Whereas when you're 9, you're like, oh, I get to go home if I get through this performance and play Mario Kart, on video games. That's what you're looking forward to when you're 9. Whereas now it's like, oh my gosh, this is my profession. What are people going to think about me? And the more we can let that go and really focus on creating something beautiful, uh, that's the thing that's going to actually help us play our best. It's often the thing that we do the opposite of that will help us the most.
Yeah,
So,
we just get in our own way the whole time. We're our own worst enemy a lot of the time, I think, because we know that we're at a certain position. So if you mess up at that position, then everything is gone. That's what we think. But actually, we've all heard the great pianists in the world fluff up some in places. Does it diminish their performance? Usually not one iota. It's like the recordings of Alfred Cortot. He's one of my favorite pianists. I don't know what do you feel about Alfred
oh
Cortot?
yes, love it. And
Yeah.
I think that students who love Cortot, it can get into dangerous territory because they'll start using this excessive amount of rubato. You're like, okay, Cortot can do that really well. I want you to push towards that, but be a little cautious. Maybe not quite as much in the opening of the fourth ballade or something. How he's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
displacing every note, and
Yeah.
that's not something that you necessarily want to teach a student from day one, but it's something to aspire to. He makes it sound so natural and organic and pure. I love his recordings. Yes.
I mean, the first time I heard him was when I was a youngster and I listened to the radio, and there was a little filler between one program and another. This is BBC Radio 3, the music program. And they had a couple of minutes to fill. They said, we'll put on now a recording of Alfred Cortot playing the Aeolian Harp Etude of Chopin. And I thought, okay, let's listen to that before the news. And I was literally transfixed by the beauty of the sound, by the fluidity of the sound and what he did with the music. I'll never forget that feeling of just being transported to another place by the beauty of what he was doing. How did we get onto the subject of Courteau? Oh yes, the recordings, not that one, but the other recordings are jam-packed with wrong notes and fluffs and errors and things because first of all they couldn't do retakes easily in those days. They just had to take one. And second of all, he didn't have so much time to practice at certain points in his career. You know, he was busy teaching and writing stuff, and I listen to these things sometimes, and I think it actually doesn't really make that much difference to me. I can still completely get the message of the music. It doesn't diminish the music. It doesn't diminish him as an artist. It just makes him human, and I think being human is a good thing since we are human. You know, why not
Yeah,
acknowledge
and
our
on that,
frailty?
oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, it's fine. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that unconditional self-acceptance for where you're at right now is something that's very important. So when I was a young teenager, very ambitious, and I wanted to learn all the Chopin etudes, and I did, and I recorded them when I was 15, and I look back with hideous embarrassment on some of the tempos that I took. I mean, they're pretty clean recordings. I really worked hard at that, and that was a huge project, but some people, I mean, they're not even close to professional standards like Murray Pariah or Louis Lorty or Garrick Olson or whatever it might be. But a lot of people say, I really enjoyed those because I heard them in a different light than I may have heard them, in these breakneck tempos. And people know that I was 15 and they know that I wasn't like Evgeny Kissin, playing the Chopin concertos when I was 11 with huge orchestras. But I think that's important for people to remember. They may look at pianists like Courteau or Horowitz, or even people like you and I, whose living is making is teaching and delving into this music, and we've had really amazing teachers and educations, and they think, oh, I can't do that's beyond me. But going from where you're at right now and continuing to learn is the most important thing. It doesn't necessarily matter that I achieve this specific level,
Yeah,
rather the striving for that. And like you said, the greatest professionals have weaknesses. Horowitz, if you listen to his interviews, he's one of the most humble people ever. And I noticed that it's usually amateurs and people that really can't produce the results they want that are the most judgmental, and the people who are most accomplished are the most gracious, encouraging human beings you'll ever meet. Like, of
absolutely.
course, in lessons, the best teachers in the world are harsh, but they're also some of the most loving people. So just everybody keep that in mind. I think we've heard a lot of great encouragement from Graham today, tons of words of wisdom. Very grateful for you taking the time. And I think that's a perfect place to maybe end. Very optimistic
Right.
here. So,
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's been great talking to you again. We must do
abs-
it again. We must do it again.
let's do it again. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Graham.
you.